My son and I were driving to New England some years ago, and I took him to Phillips Exeter, where I graduated in 1606, and Amherst, where I graduated in 70. And as I looked at those institutions, I thought that I would be close to Phillips Exeter forever. When I left Amherst, I thought that I was estranged from that college forever. My response seeing these places years later, driving out away from Exeter, from the very point where I got into a car after I graduated, the thought that passed my mind was that really necessary? We pull into Amherst on a summer night. Stevens draped across the Robert Frost Library. Park at Pratt. I got out. I said I'd enroll tomorrow. I had a wonderful 4 years in Amherst, and it was there that I actually became political. I think that I was probably a surprise when we first became friends at Amherst. I probably found out or perceived that I was relatively apolitical. I didn't know what a Democrat was until I went to Exeter. Then I thought everybody was a Democrat. Finally, I meet 3 people at Amherst early on that connected me to this passion as an historian. Hadley Arkes, who taught me politics. Tom Davis, who was the only person at Amherst I knew who had voted for Goldwater, who had supported Goldwater in 1964. That made it very interesting to me. We became immediate friends, and my wife Julie, who was gearing up for the next campaign. It was through that formative experience that I feel that my love of our political process, American history, and politics came together. And I remember, I still find it somewhat difficult to call Dr. Arkes Hadley, but I remember the course on parties and what a difference that means. Well, in fact, I wrote, you're talking about elements of parties leaving, driving other elements out. I think Kevin Phillips called that negative reference theory. Was that it?
That's right.
That's what I wrote my thesis on under your.
Yeah, both of our theses would be, and Glenn will have the same problems, and it's real life merging the public to the majority.
Right. Yeah. My informal task, signed by Hadley, was to refute that. And so I did a very in-depth case study on the state of Tennessee, and I found that I could not refute it. And so my thesis became affirming findings about Tennessee. So, by the way, the process of doing that thesis led to a very interesting interview that I had. Kevin Phillips is in the Nixon White House, and so I was actually able to meet with Nixon and Phillips on this thesis together. The 3 of us.
That's rather odd to doing a thesis at Amherst.
Well, it's an historic moment, too, because what President Nixon revealed to us both is that about 2 days before, for the first time in their internal polling history, the word conservative closed more favorably than the word liberal. And so the idea then was maybe we should look into rebranding the Republican Party as the conservative party.
Okay. Good. Hey, then once started watching Tell, he said, we think World War II is slipping into history. He said, Julie was going to a board meeting somewhere in Pennsylvania. She got off the turnpike. What was this? She's trying to check into the hotel. What from us?
Next into a Redwood Inn or something like that. And the girl asked her to spell Eisenhower. And so she spells Eisenhower, and the girl said, oh, yeah, like the boulevard out there. And now, but when was that? That would have been 1985, probably. When Eisenhower was president, only 1 in 3 Americans can spell his name. So it's always been a heavy lift. Anyway, the girl immediately recognized Eisenhower Boulevard somewhere in Harrisburg.
Anyway, so Tom, this is recording this story you told in your book, 2006. It's like Helen Barker's story about the unreal constituent. Look at all I had done for you. You're not voting for me. And Tom had arranged disability payments from people to family. And this guy was not going to vote from this time. After all of this, well, it's the only way I can send a message to George Bush. Yeah. And I said, vote for me, I'll carry your message to the White House. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. So, well, first of all, it's an honor for me to be here with Hadley, who was my thesis advisor in Amherst, gave me an intellectual basis for politics. I always had that gut feeling coming from a recalling family in Nebraska and Virginia. But Hadley laid an intellectual foundation that carried me through as campaign chairman for 2 cycles, House Republicans for laying a book, and David, who became my friend in Amherst, has been a lifelong friend and a baseball aficionado, gave me the opportunity to work in the Nixon White House for Harry Dent, who was the Southern strategist. And my senior thesis was on political realignment in the South. Right. With a new group of voters introduced into the system, African Americans, how are the parties going to align? And VOK and others had felt that once the pure whites and the blacks could maybe overturn the Plan Nation, others and the big bulls, it didn't happen. Politics. And the thesis pointed this out. We took the Wallace vote in '68 and we tracked out the active and competitive congressional elections. It basically foresaw. I read it the other day, and they were like kind of on the mark in terms of where things were moving. Politics was becoming more cultural and less economic. And it led me to running. I was chairman of the county board in Fairfax, which is our equivalent mayor to county many people, and then to Congress and McKee, Cheller, Banking. But a couple of things to help it. And I wrote a book with a guy who had been chairman of the Democratic, because we got put together on talk shows and observations about how politics was changing or the same. And we said, it was to say, Mark Foster said, let writing booklets. Let people understand what's happened. And basically, as Hadley said, we've become basically behaving like a parliamentary system in the mountains of Palestine. It doesn't work very well. It starts with the voters who don't want to vote for the name on the jersey. I always led my ticket out in Fairfax County. My presidential candidate never carried my impression district, and I was winning races in the mid-'60s. They voted for the name on the jersey. Now people vote for the color of the jersey. And so what has happened is the parties have become ideologically aligned, both the ideological steering parties. We can get into the questions and answers. I'll just give you the elevator speech. A couple of things, 3 things have happened on a macro basis. Number one, probably 85% of the House and the Senate, the only race that matters is the primary election. November in these districts is what we call a constitutional formality. So members give their time and their attention and their voting records to their party base. They don't care about independents. Independents don't make a difference. The other party doesn't make a difference. It makes compromise hard because primary voters are it's a small sliver of the electorate, but they tend to be sore and pretty light or pretty left. And then they punish compromise. They don't reward it. Complementing that is the fact that people no longer get the same information. People don't tune into the news for information. They tune in for affirmation. They want their worldviews validated. And by the way, that's what the papers that feeds them. These are business models at the end of the day. When Fox News acknowledged that maybe Trump had lost the election, they were losing hundreds of thousands of viewers to Newsmax, and they had to recalibrate. When the Washington Post decided last year they weren't going to endorse the presidential race, they lost hundreds of thousands of online subscribers of angry liberals who weren't being fed what they wanted to hear every day. But think of what this rift is in these single-party districts. The rift just widens. People walking around in their own bubbles, arm right now, a nice stew. And then finally, on top of that, Congress attempted to change the campaign finance laws to take this big money and this evil soft money out of politics. But Hadley, the end result of this, and I had my students, you'll hear Russ, the first one was Scott, I was going to injure the artist. We had Russ Feingold, I had to read Russ Feingold's speech and Mitch McConnell's speech on the King Feingold. And I said, that was right. And turns out that my students said almost unanimously, well, McConnell's right. I mean, my argument, I was a 4-manager against the bill, is okay, you're taking this soft money out. Where do you think this money's going to go? Do you think it's going to disappear? It started to come back in 547s, but it's come back now as super PACs after the courts were through with it with Citizens United in the speech now case out of the district. And David, we did some stuff together on it. But what it did is it moved the money away from the parties, which were a centering force in American politics for 200 years, right, out to the Whigs. And so just think of it this way. And you don't have to read the book. Well, the book, by the way, if you need an Ambien, just read the book and it'll push you to sleep. If the districts have gone from competitive center districts out to here, if the way people have received their news goes from factual embedded news out to here, and if the money has moved away from the parties out to here, what do you expect? And the end result is the polarization we have today. There used to be liberal Republicans, there used to be conservative Democrats. The party are completely ideologically assorted today. And we can get into this in some detail with questions and answers, but that's just by one. So you had a government, they took away by those when they took away the electo. You had, he said, some figures caught districts have been over 70% for Bush, Floyd, Obama, and this other. And like that, still about 5 to 6 Democrats couldn't you win in those districts carried by Obama. You see, these things are absolutely disappearing. Now, if the other candidate gets over 53, 54%, you don't survive. It's hard to personalize these districts anymore. You only have 3 Republicans in the House that are in districts Trump didn't carry, and just for close districts. You have 1 senator who's in a state that Trump didn't carry, and that's Susan Collins from Maine. And Maine is a small state without a lot of change. She's been around. You can still crystallize it to some extent. Manchin had the same things going for him in West Virginia. By the way, they each had a Supreme Court nominations they could vote against their party with right before the election, which kind of stamped that independence on them going into November. But this starts with the voters. The voters are voting for the party, not the person. And in Washington now, that's how everything is parliamentary. That means everything is filibuster. Democrats are a no on everything. If they are in the minority, or Republicans, if they are, it means impeachment is now a no confidence vote. I mean, just think about what this means. It wasn't designed this way. Madison warned against Federalist 10. Well, Washington warned against his farewell address. But how do you control factions? What's happened? Washington talked about bring back geographical factions. Madison about ideological factions. We have them both together right now, and it's combustible. So anyway, let's make it open up for questions. Right? Oh, okay. I'm going to get into something else first. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal were lamenting this morning about the way all the nominations for all the supposition in the government was slow walk. You have 300 people waiting in a queue. And while this is going on, the president has to start making recess appointments or contriving excuses for not making recess appointments. All this simply takes more power to the hands of the executive.
Right.
Right? As Congress receives.
There's another factor, too.
And that's...
I would say sort of an historical factor, and that is most political eras, or the political eras that we teach and cover in Amherst, are generally dominated by an overriding sense, or kind of a consensus on what overriding problems are facing the country, on basic national, domestic, and international policies. And all of this is rooted in priorities. And we are at a moment in history right now where we cannot make up our mind about what the basic problem is facing this country. We are divided between a racial imperative, DEI, trying to readdress the racial problem of this country. We are also confronted with an emergency in the form of a shrinking middle class, downward mobility, and stagnant income. That is an emergency. Race is an emergency. This is an emergency. What is the priority facing the country? We cannot make up our minds. We've had one tie after another since 1988. And in the absence, this is something I learned in the political parties class, in the absence of a dominant party and a dominant nation or a dominant challenge, there is no incentive for either side to bandwagon with the other side. There's no incentive to cross the aisle. We do not have a majority now. I think that we have a chance to counter some of these trends that Tom is talking about, the secular trends like business models and so forth. When the American electorate resolves what the number one question is facing this country. Is it restoring middle class leverage, opportunity, that type of thing, or is it addressing the perpetual problem of race and diversity in this country. We are completely divided on it right now.
Lincoln said in thought that slavery was the most central issue. We can't find any place to talk about it. It's too explosive in the churches. It's too explosive to put it in the Bibles. One of the tasks of political leaders and statesmen is to show people how to talk about these things. So Lincoln's lot from making it through the letters of those soldiers in the Civil War. He was speaking in a way that you have to say, what advice will you give them? You're people teaching rhetoric. They're very sensitive. What advice will you give the Republicans how to frame the issue, say, in 2026?
How to frame the issue?
No. The question, your advice, and the question is what? You agree with me, I think into the country where the Bidens to have been like that. Like, let me give David a minute to think on it. Intellectual, I'll give you a gut reaction while you're your age. Okay.
Well, I think that
Okay.
from
Thomas,
so get Bernie, then you talked about you talked about the character parties and the character idea ultimately ideas are at the root of political coalitions. Principles matter, so forth. I think that the Republicans have successfully articulated what drives the Republican government today, what drives Republican politics. The question is how to sustain that. Messaging in 2026 is going to be about sustaining a kind of slight majority that they have already organized around a very clear set of priorities.
Okay.
Having to do with, I would say, defining a jurisdictional line between the United States and the rest of the world, globalized throughout the Reagan era. Well, for now, you see trends all around the world where nations are trying to redefine themselves in relationship to this phenomenon. It has impacted our middle class, which is why we have a middle class issue. This issue is there; it's understood. The question is how to sustain it, and so messaging would address that. Would it be a kinder, gentler Trump administration? I think, or a compassionate Trumpism? I'm not know what what's the reformulation would be.
Tom Griffith says that of trying to go to the rescue of us, as we try to regain our footing. Sometimes he said, we ought to bring some President back out from our friends down on the table, right?
Well, I would just say this. Midterm, I was campaign chairman in a presidential year and in a midterm, and there were very different dynamics. Presidential elections tend to be choice elections, and off-year elections tend to be a referendum kind of president. And I think the fundamental question for many voters is, do we want to give Trump more power, or do we want to give him a blank check, or do we want to put the brakes on and put a check on him? And that's basically why in midterm elections, all but 3 times in history, the president's powerful lost seats in the midterms. By the way, Martin Cross, my co-author, and I were campaign chairman for 2 of those 3 cycles. So we have a unique understanding about what those dynamics are. And I just going to go a little more depth. Yeah, Republicans' problems right now go ultimately to the economy. What elected Trump at the end of the day was the war and inflation. And inflation is still a problem if you're down in the economic scale. And getting a handle on that, I think, is good, critical to Republican success. Reagan had that problem. Like, he came in, like Carter, and he said, stay the course, and they limited their offices, I think, to 26 seats or whatever it was. Now, they also had the opportunity to yeah, it was Lexburg, right. And so, but I think, and of course, when you get the rapidity of change in an administration brings, the tendency is for people to kind of put the brakes on a little bit and get comfortable with it. Republicans have 4 problems doing in the midterms outside of solving or keeping inflation in check. Number 1 is that their base is migrated from the country club to the country. So their base used to be the higher educated, easy to get out voters who tended to be well-read. Now, higher turnouts tend to benefit Republicans. Lower turnouts tend to benefit, lower turnouts benefit Republicans, higher turnouts tend, let me flip that. Higher turnouts tend to benefit Republicans. Lower turnouts tend to benefit Democrats because their base is now a more upscale economic and education base. Number 2, the Democratic base right now is angry. They're on fire. This is traditional without parties. Our parties become more fired out, and it tilts about in an off-year election in favor of the out party because they are motivated, and the incumbent party less motivated because they're already in power. Third, you have a lot of voters out there who are Trump-centric voters. If he's on the ballot, they'll show up, but they're not sure, they're not really Republicans yet. If he's not on the ballot, they're really hesitant to get out. Obama had this problem in 22, by the way. Obama, though, his base just stayed home. But the more challenging issue is independent voters who just want to put the brakes on, and they may like Trump, but they just, we want to put a check on him. And that's the problem. And we see in special elections around the country, so the legislature, council, Democrats vote for family. Their 2024 base. We have a special election tomorrow in my Wilson-Rexville district. I look at the bellwether. If Republicans come within 30 points, I think it'll be a win. Given this, because that's kind of the margin to how these areas have evolved now. And district never gave me a hard time. I was never to usually not even within 20, but because of the changing coalitions and demographics, it's just shifted. The Democrats are more motivated, and Republicans are on the defense. And then you get a look at Virginia and New Jersey, which right now don't look favorable to the Republicans. In the midterm, it gives you a harbinger of what can happen next year in these congressional elections. The good news for Republicans is there just weren't that many districts that are contentious. Most of these districts go way over here. I liken it this way, David. If you put a Trump sign in my neighborhood, it's a hate crime. But if you go out 50 miles, people are putting up their own Trump signs, and it's kind of it's a standard. And we're just very polarized, and so there's just about that many seats that are in contention, and that's why they're going through this redistricting stuff, trying to limit the number of candidates going back and forth, and knowing that you won't get the wide swings that you could get in the old term, the midterms, where you get like a 2010 where Republicans to pick up 6 seats.
Well, I think in 2024, one of my explanations for the intensity of that campaign is that I think both sides thought that they were playing for 12 years. Trump might take him Vance, a very, very interesting vice presidential pick, is essentially planning 12-year regime, sort of an FDR thing. I think we'll find out, if you're whether that is going to happen. If the Republicans are able to hold or gain seats in the off year, that can duplicate his historic achievement in 2002, doing that on behalf of W. Bush, and it would replicate 1934. That would be a signal that the country has, in fact, moved, Papa died, that we're perhaps not 50-50 anymore. Maybe now it's 52-47 or something like that. We're moving in the direction of a more stable majority, which over time will bring and attract, perhaps, ironically, restore a certain measure of bipartisanship by giving the other side an incentive, in fact, an imperative, and the cooperating majority party. If Democrats pick up the House in 2026 or the Senate, I think that the Trump administration becomes yet another administrations or correctings. They apply corrections to errors by the prior administration. The Trump would be yet another presidency. But if Republicans expand their majorities in the House and in the Senate, I think 2024 will go into the books as a sea change.
And let me add to that my famous VOK quote. Remember, I didn't public opinion, where he basically says, voters aren't stupid. They're just not informed. But they know when the shoe is pinching and it's time to get a new pair of shoes. And I think that's really what drove Trump in this last election, was inflation. As you go down the economic scale, if you notice the Republican great beautiful bill, or whatever they call it, on that, they held off most of these Medicaid cuts for 2 years, so they have a chance to revisit it. They knew where their base was. This was Democrats are still view their coalition in the rearview mirror. Tax cuts for the rich and all this time. The Republicans kind of understood that, but you had to go to these places because that's where the money is. The money is in the entitlement program, the interest rate, right? Okay, we're enough now. Questions from that? Anybody? Ross says, "I'm Europe. What do you like? Lights? Get what happened with Europe?"
So,
Let him ask.
I spot those parliamentarians at my right at the start of the years, Jerry and
it seems to me that either side has a lot of unilaterally surrender because you're getting worse and worse. You see any sullen got to getting them to more, welfare distance.
Well, I think gerrymandering is a symptom, it's not a cause. The major cause of these one-party districts is what we in political science call residential sorting patterns. The fact that Democrat people who live in cities are heavily Democratic. You can't draw a Republican district within 20 miles of Washington, D.C. There just aren't any Republicans. Trump got 6% of the vote in D.C., so you know what that jury pool wouldn't look like the gone here. And he lost the Republican primary there. Trump won 2 states. He lost the Republican primary by this time. So that's the major cause of this. People like to live around people like themselves. Number 2 is the Voting Rights Act, which may get struck. The court's going to visit this, but think of it this way. If you pack minorities into districts, you end up bleaching the districts around them. So in the Deep South, all you have in the House are white Republicans can fight Democrats. And by the way, no reason to talk to the other side because they don't play no meaningful role in your election. Now, the court may strike that down. And then the third factor is jury, which with AI and stuff like that, just takes the voters out of the equation all more. So it is a cause, but it's not the major cause. Major cause is residential sorting patterns. To prove it, look at the Senate and how the Senate is also very non-competitive at this point. And they don't have jury. Everybody who runs at large. That's a straight residential like that. But it's madness. I mean, what's going on now is bad for the country. Everybody knows it, but everybody does it. I had to oversee redistricting in 2002 for Republicans because I was campaign chairman. And in my own district, I had a district that was, I won a gerrymandered district, beat a Democrat and carved the district for herself in 94. And it was a heavy lift because I had Reston in the middle of it. Restons were all on people right up in my district. And I just needed a little help. My re-elects were in the 60s. I was doing fine, but you knew in a bad year, this place could erupt. And I was lucky because my wife was chair of the committee in the State House that drew the district lines, and she took rest of them. And I'm happy. A lot of complaining about it. I didn't invent the system. I just not going to go with it.
Glad the mark years ago, we knew the 2 people in charge of the election campaigns for the Green Party. Yeah, Nita Lawley, was it Nita?
It was Nita.
Nita Lawley and Tom. So there's no comparison between the 2. If you tell Tom the name of the district, he'll tell you whoever's running for it. He'll tell you who's talking to who in that district and so on.
The Mount Lodell branch, they're very good with it. The team around it.
Don't put you in check and observation into this polarization question. Again, I think it's the absence of I think a big factor is the absence of consensus about priority questions. The Congress had no problem whatsoever during COVID passing $8 trillion spending increases and so forth by voice vote. There's when circumstances compel parties seem to be able to cooperate on big things. Most of the issues, the so-called wedge issues, are really very hypothetical questions, or religious questions in many ways. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin, that type of thing, if you think about it. The kind of gun control. You look at the differences between parties on gun control are really very minimal. What it comes down to, but the differences that do exist, and define people who are pro-gun or anti-gun, it's like defining Catholic and Protestant. So there are religious sort of differences that have crept in. Cultural, I think, would be another one for it. The defined differences between the parties. But faced with an emergency like COVID, were we to have I would say, full-scale oppression, things like that on this word, I think that at least the macro factors would weigh in favor of.
And to your point, TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, that Congress came together and you had a Republican president, Democratic Congress, and we were all scared out of our legs. Nobody knew where this stuff was going.
Republicans voted that down once.
We voted down
that was, but you voted for it.
I went out of, yeah, I went to vote. Now it's quick for it. I had a guy in the back room. He said, man, I hope this thing passes. I said, no, I got you down as a no. So I'm still in no. He said, hey, you vote for this. I could never explain this to my constituents. They said, why are you here? You can't take a tough vote. I mean, is it really? But people like getting reelected. No, we pick another.
There's a lot on the line that I mean, a lot of like, this is fall of 2008. And I taught on Mondays that semester. And I mean, I'm teaching the greatest people I've ever known. And everybody was full of comments, reading and smiles. Class was fun and electric and so forth. And the market is crashing every Monday. Every point so up. The markets want to go to zero. They want to zero out. They want to bottom out, as they did in 1932. And that bill and other measures taken preventing that.
We had it maxed out.
Yeah.
Let me go back, pick up another point in time earlier. John Hyde on Wall Street Journal pointed out, kind of leaving bill, that all we know of the shooter in Minneapolis is that he went through the surgeries, the pressure on the surface. He realized he made a mistake. He was too disdainful. But he also was very attentive to what were gun-free school zones. He knew where he could go there would be no armed resistance, right? And it's quite, as soon as this thing happened, the reaction of the left is, the problem's got control. But interesting, I think, bearing up Tom's point, is that I don't think any of them had immediately covered that point, that this guy was gone through the surgery, he was bitter, enraged about the experience. He was very tempted in using his guns to pick out places where there was gun control, and so on. The media did pick this one up. Now, talk about the last campaign. One of the wells that really worked for Trump was about for criminals, these prolongs. That one really worked. And I can't believe this is one of those issues they think is 80-20 for Trump about the men playing in women's sports and these horrendous surgeries. I can't believe that this thing wouldn't have the rest of us. They put 40.
And let me make this observation. So I ran in the district. I was the only Republican winning out here, and you could look at my markets. I was unopposed to two of my 7 terms. And when I left, it flipped, and it's pretty solid. And there were Democrats getting elected. I never ran a district-wide race. I segmented it. David talked about, what's the most important issue? What's our priorities? I learned some things. I learned if you're a Salvadorian, and I had a district full of 40,000 Salvadorians, TPS was the only district in that temporary protective status. This was going to happen. I jumped on it. We had Alzheimer's groups. If you're an Alzheimer's caregiver, there is not another issue in the world. I was at Alzheimer's poster get funding, and those kind of issues up there. We segmented this, and that's how I was to break the lock that Democrats had, that people would identify me with other things. The visa waiver program for Koreans, we have a little soul classic in the end, just a Korean, we had a Vietnamese area. Each of these, I went to Vietnam and took over, anyway, long stories, but we found, with Hadley's teaching, the experience I got working with the White House, you learned to market segment this stuff to what was the most important issue to people. All these issues make a difference. Trans makes a difference. We know we're looking for, but are people that vote on that, or is there something more important? And the one thing I employed as campaign chairman was we would try to the extent you can localize, try to, but they don't do that. It's just very hard to do that. Campaigns don't go that direction. Voters, and they said, only if the shoe is pitching do they look around. But what is the priority for a voter? And as David noted at this point, we can't decide what we want to do, and it may be the border at some point, but once you solve that, it gets down to these other issues, right? You're worrying out, well, where's the economy, where's inflation? And so it's going to vary from election to election, and you're in politics, you need to look ahead. You got to look up, around the corner and see where things are going. As Gretzky said, speak of where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. And so many times in politics, we run the last election. And it's always moving. Coalitions are always mutating a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a little bit of credit. Here's the, you do talk about the impact of trans questions, partial birth abortion, things like that. And there are not lots of cases like this, but the cases that exist are 40 symbolically. I think they're called valence. These are valence questions in many ways. In other words, values are expressed in these. And I will, partial birth abortion, I might be one of the few, but persuaded that won the 2016 election for Donald Trump. The critical moment in that election was the third debate.
I'm really glad when you were killing that.
That was the key moment of the entire election. When it ended up, the events that astounded everybody on television on election night were the appearance of evangelicals in massive numbers in the Middle West, Trump carrying the Catholic vote for the first time in history. How does all that happen? That happens because of that exchange line.
Well, he promised to get a success for Scalia.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying he's up there saying, well, it might be all right with her, but it's not all right with me. Remember that?
That's about taking a baby out of the when I tell you to take it, yeah.
It might be okay with her, but it's not all right with me.
Yeah, that's the other
So
result.
it's that 5 minutes moved enough voters who brought other issues elected him, my opinion. Believe us.
Yeah. There's not many on this. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Oh, okay, wait a minute. Okay. Oh my God, from Northampton. Okay. Oh my God. You could identify yourself.
I'm Larry Rothberg, Amherst College.
Okay, come on here on the line. Okay, great to see you.
It's just good to see you, Stefan. I'm wondering if you all think there's some limit to the parliamentary identification party. You now Soren Mondani on one hand, and on the other, he's got people who make the U.S. sector side in World War II. Is there going to be some point where that identification, whatever the party does, is going to break? And of course, as the late Pomeroy said, everybody hates the Jews. But
That's from National Public anyway.
yeah.
Oh, real quote.
Is there?
You want to comment? I mean, the interesting thing to me, is David Nile coming up in politics. I mean, the Jewish vote was critical to Democratic successes across the country. I'm not sure where this started to change, but you have Democrats, in my opinion, preach a philosophy of victimization to different groups. To me, I look at West Wallinger and change in 60 years with nothing but Democratic rulers. Really got worse, right? Anacostia, same thing. But they preach victimization and they keep it. And the new victims now are the Palestinians. And I think, given divisions in the Jewish community over Netanyahu, made some of that a little bit easier for some of the people to make that transfer. And in my opinion, it's way out camp at this point in terms of where this is gone, in terms of part of the American mainstream thought on this, like following what you're looking some other areas have gone. And it is causing some political realignment in those areas. Just remember, I had 6 mosques in my congressional district. I had to always, I was a strong supporter of Israel. I always had to balance that when I walked into the mosque. But then very socially conservative. You could always go back to the social issues, and you walk in and you say, how do I approach these people? If I have to defend my Israel position, I'm dead up. But if I'm going to talk about marriage or something like that, I'm in good stead. But it's just surprising to me how public opinion has shifted on that, and the Democrats have, and even people like Schumer, that was brought up in basically a Jewish district, assembly district, congressional district, are now having to balance the changes in their own constituencies, in their own party constituencies over time. So it's going to be a real test for this does, but I say this about Mondani and Connie, is when George W. Bush left the presidency, he left after 2 wars that had gone sideways and an economic meltdown. Your Republican Party was a shell of itself. And, power orders a vacuum. The Tea Party groups rushed in and filled that void that moved the party decidedly rightward out to that. And that's been established since then. The Democratic Party, after Biden, is a shell of itself. This was an embarrassment. This is ends up, and what you see is these left fundamentalist groups moving in and filling that void. And their party established is not sure what to do, but the energy fact is with the Mondanis of the world, and this is to be repeated all over the country. They're going to let quite a few people in this midterm who start winning primaries. The real test will come 2 years later when you nominate presidential candidate.
See the broad outlines of a national consensus here, however, because what's driving and Mondani in New York is what they call a new proletariat. These are college students who are bright, They want rent controls. They want community grocery stores, so forth. This is urban educated poor.
And as stupid as other people who've been to elite schools in this period, right?
But I'm saying what's driving it is economic distress. That's what's driving Trump, which means that both parties, and I'm sort of backing away or coming around to the idea that that economic distress, downward pressure on wages or inflation, however you want to look at it, that this is emerging, it seems to me, as the victor in this battle over priorities to emerging. I could see Mamdani creating a sort of pool of voters that would be actually open to voting Republican to have to what while driving Jewish vote.
How so?
Like the affinity between Sanders and Trump. There is an affinity. Sanders and Trump have different approaches to the question of middle-class distress, but they have, but they're voters and driven by the same considerations. Sanders versus Clinton in the Democratic Party created voters that I think Trump.
What would be the, I'm saying this now,
Mamdani is running on, he calls it quote affordability. That's a Democratic word for lack of basic income, downward pressure on wages, so forth. Lack of their affordability. But that's a Trump issue.
A millionaire,
There's a Trump issue.
a millionaire in a rent control. But it does stuff not make it. What Trump had going for him with these voters that Sanders didn't is he had that cultural affinity. And these people identify him on a lot of these cultural issues that Sanders just couldn't go there. So it's a complex only things that motivate voters as we live.
But a politics driven by economics would describe the politics that we studied when we were at Amherst. Correct. One thing I remember about parties being here at Amherst is that you can more or less identify Republicans and Democrats by drawing the line across an income table. In other words, above the line, Republican, below the line, Democrat.
His geography was still part of it. The geography you still
say it. This evolved in sort of tribalism, cultural tribalism. But now, with the emergence of Trump priorities, the Trump voter, and the move of labor in the Republican Party on grounds of economic distress, politics are becoming more economic based. And economic based would be, one nice thing about economic differences is that they're negotiable. Well, so if we organize politics on the basis of economics, this partisan divide, this polarization will moderate to some degree.
I can see one doesn't one of discovers that rent control does apply, and so on, and that and works for you. What they wanted to down New York, like because I think I know it pretty well. There was a time where the Republican Party in New York took advantage of Democratic disarray and won. It was Giuliani, and then Bloomberg won the first time. The opportunity was there again. The Republicans are failing season. Remember, but now they won it privately. And as you pointed out, earlier, I think, the number of people who voted is small. Number of people who voted primary and much more aggressive. The problem is that you got three candidates running against Mamdani, all of whom are terribly flawed for a variety of different reasons. And interestingly, Trump seems to be trying to figure out a way to get Adams out of the race. Yes. If that happens, and if they can get Sliwa move out, a flawed normal actually to win that, and if not be a Republican, be reasonably close. I mean, there's a real opportunity here, which is unfortunately not being taken advantage of. But if you go back to the political party's comment, it's a failure on the part of the Republicans to actually have the opportunity to match this. Which
question I would have for Tom, since you wrote your thesis about realignment, and so does I. If national politics were to realign in the direction of the Republicans, what would be the next region that would begin to lean Republicans? In other words, where
Well, they're picking up ethnic voters. I mean, you're
Northeast.
yeah, but no, my ethnic voters across the country have moved more Republican. If you look at it with Trump, it shocked a lot of Democrats that after Trump's strong border in 2016, that 2020 he was performing better among Hispanics and significantly better in 2024. I mean, part of the Texas redraw is based on those Hispanics in South Texas moving over, and we're seeing this Florida. The same thing, that Hispanic vote, the Democrats have this people of color that they were using, and some people don't identify themselves as people of color. There are other issues that can be socialism, economics, and so on that are driving them to Trump and his more culturally conservative message.
Well, watching like 2024, New Jersey was carried and kind of decided right about midnight. Trump,
Lately,
and Illinois was a relatively close race. So forth. There's been a lot of, but I would say the Northeast. In other words, if there's a section of the country.
well, look at Passaic County. Passaic County last time was very close and being solidly Democrat, picking up a lot of Hispanic and ethnic voters. And Republicans are making inroads in those areas, but they've got to perform economically to keep it.
I wanted to get back to the issue of gerrymandering in terms of, don't you think that what's enabled this is some recent decisions by the Supreme Court and invalidations of parts of the Voting Rights Act, and do you think they got parts of that wrong?
Well, look, they didn't get into one under Baker versus Squaw. It was only like a decade after Colburn versus Green, which then for the court had refused to get into put a thicket on that. And the courts has refused to get into put a thicket on gerrymandering. That's going outside of up there with one person, one vote. So what has happened is this is moving to state courts. And state courts are now intervening using state laws to try to redraw lines. In North Carolina, the Democratic Supreme Court redrew the lines the Republican legislature had put in. So the Republicans went after those court justices and beat them, and they came back and put their lines back in. There it is in Pennsylvania this time. Democratic judges that are up for reconfirmation votes. The Republicans are putting millions of dollars into that race to try to knock those liberals out from not getting reconfirmed. So it's new, and it's in power Borzavaki. They're finding ways to get through, but the court has to date not gotten up in this as egregious, because I think we got a little bit redistricting it, and the jury is way out of control. It's egregious. It undermines confidence in the democratic process. It takes most of us out of the equation. So election is just a formula.
Congress actually passed a statute on gerrymandering.
Well, they tried to do it nationally, but remember, and these are basically election laws are written at the state level. So yeah, the Democrats put a bill on the gerrymandering as part of their big voter room next thing. It did a lot of other goofy things. So click. Yeah, no. This was under right. So I don't know where the courts step in and get involved, but I tell you, the parties aren't, because you've got members who are sitting there that are beneficiaries of this system. And they're not about to start writing laws that are going to help somebody else control their districts if they think they can control it. I mean, that's just common sense.
Could be time to court to listen to line the Baker versus Carr. Richard Epstein really came from things that the message caught.
Well, they just didn't, because
serious things like a computer can get it.
now they did this. They just did this in the Maryland case, and the Maryland lines were egregious. They were egregious. But they had been passed by the voters in a referendum, and the court did not get involved. But I think eventually that probably happens. But
I mean, but what had been happening under the Voting Rights Act is at least the southern states were subject to more scrutiny in terms of how these districts can be drawn, and that part was removed, which has enabled some of the gerrymandering.
well, actually, let me take the other tack on if I keep just for a second. First of all, you haven't killed Justice September, so I don't think it matters in terms of getting a pre-clearance at this point. They're not going to look at it the same way. The Voting Rights Act was a gift to African Americans. Their numbers swelled in the House. It was a gift to Republicans, right? Because in packing these minorities, the losers were white Democrats. They got wiped out. After the 94 election, they were wiped out in the South. And they continued to be wiped out. This was the 92 amendments to the Voting Rights Act. You will find many white Democrats in the South. Well, they could be from Northern Virginia, or they could represent you know, Louisville, Kentucky, or some New South area where you have a lot of migrants. But by and large, this has been good for both Republicans and African Americans. The problem from Republicans has been that they benefited from this. But now you have some interpretive courts say, well, you can get 2 districts instead of 1. And the game has been changed from saying we need a majority black district to, oh, we can survive with 35%. Both parties are gaming this to see how they can get the maximum number of representatives out of the Senate. I mean, there's not right or wrong. I think it's explaining
the way there's a war on now. The Democrats are threatening to redistrict California. Republicans are moving forward with Texas,
Missouri.
Who's going to win this?
Well, Republicans are a net winner under that, but it's we have to get this through the California electorate, and that's going to be a lot of money. Charles Moberg Jr. financed the change in the state constitution to put this in the hands of a commission, and Senior just died, and so Munger's got Senior's money now, and he's stepping forward on this, and it's going to be a real interesting battle to watch. The League of Women Voters and Common Cause, that you're generally against, Jerry, are all of a sudden, they're neutral. They're neutral. The mask is not the Lone Ranger. We know where the leader.
Listen, before you go, I your thought.
And it's, you know, the phenomenon of Trump and obvious, but I'd like each of you to give a thought on this, which is a counterfactual. I just haven't seen it in the media with the talking heads. Not that I saw my wife looking at talking heads, but the question is a realignment happening? Do we have a sense, for example, that had Trump not run, and you had either DeSantis or Nikki Haley, do you think they could have won the 24 election? And why yes or why not?
I think so, because I think this is basically a referendum on Biden and the Biden administration and inflation, and getting this, I may be wrong on this, I need to yet to be proved. Trump is more like a Berlusconi. He's one of these figures, a power figure who's come in. He's been able to do some things, but there were a lot of people who weren't happy with Biden that just couldn't pull the lever through. A lot of people in the middle, and a different candidate might have been able to attract those people. You might have lost some people downscale, but I think this was fundamentally an election about the weakness of the Biden administration, and that's why the Republicans won.
I'm crazy enough to still be teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, which is why I have to go back earlier than I want to, but that is the very question that we were asking in a seminar that I'm running right now entitled The First 100 Days of the Trump Presidency. That's a special law bank that every 4 years is a realignment in progress. That's the question we're asking.
Right.
And what I can say at the outset is that a realignment is due. We're due for one.
Right.
The question is whether it's in progress. I'm a kind of believer in the cyclical approach to the presidency and to national politics. Periodically, 40 years, 70 years, a new party regime comes into power, driven by a new sense of national priorities and new sense of new consensus, so to speak. And we have very distinct, I would say, era in the American presidency between, say, 1933 and 1980. Franklin Roosevelt was a realigning force. Ronald Reagan was a realigning force. Reagan is now 20 plus 45 years ago, which means we're now due for a realignment. Now, the interesting thing about Trump is that if you evaluate presidents from Roosevelt to Carter, each has a sort of distinct role in that dynasty or suite of presidents. And if you find comparable figures in the Reagan era, Trump may go into the books as being both a Jimmy Carter and a Ronald Reagan. His first term was in many ways the disjunction of the Republican majority, which took place since 1980. He's running against core Republican policies, running against trade, be running against immigration, one of the things which have been for Reagan era policies. And so in the way Carter ran against the key Democratic policies, in 1976, which was a harbinger of a Republican realignment, or so realignment in favor of Republicans. Trump could wind up as a president in his first term, brought about the conditions for realignment, and then his second term accomplishes the realignment. But we're measuring it in this seminar, and I would say right now, my answer to that question is happily something that we don't have to answer this semester, because we answered a year from now, and that's the off-year elections. If we have a confirming election in 2026, such as the one that Tom authored in 2002, then I would say that a realignment is in progress. And I, by the way, I would say looking at polls, things like that, in my view, I believe a realignment is in progress. I think the polls are greatly understating Trump's support. Yeah, greatly understood. In fact, there's a phenomenon which is quite different from the Reagan years, which is a symptom of a new situation that we are in, perhaps a new order. I did a piece for the New York Times Magazine in 1987 on the Reagan White House. My Baker was chief staff, Howard Baker, and I was assigned to sort of cover him. I remember an afternoon that I spent with Frank Donatelli, who was Reagan's chief political strategist, and he showed me a set of polls, which were puzzling. Do you approve of Ronald Reagan's hard line on the Soviet Union? Yes, 35, no 60. Do you approve of Reagan's budget cuts against the poor? Yes, 33, no 60. Do you admire Ronald Reagan as a person? Yes, 75, no 15. All the personal attributes in these polls were positive. All the policy attributes were negative. And so the question is, which is a leading indicator, which is a trailing indicator? I think that Reagan's popularity was the leading indicator in these polls. In other words, the nation was moving in his direction. They just hadn't quite bought the program yet. I think today we see the opposite phenomenon. I think, do I agree with, if you were to hypothetically state a Trump-issued position, I think that we're a 60-40 nation now in favor of Trump policies. Do I like President Trump? That's a 45-50 against proposition. So which is the leading indicator, which is the trailing indicator? I think policy right now is the leading indicator. I've had several very significant papers written in the last 2 or 3 years based on Q study and others saying that voters, by Jove, are motivated by issues today. They're voting on issues.
But just remember, midterms, it's all about turnout. And our party tends to be more just and Trump is not humming. So
my short answer is I think Republicans will win at 2020 to what?
That's what?
2028. In other words, I think we're in for a 12-year ball.
Mike Contrito caught with us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, give me
That's what you can say to me.
You know, I used to have the nice, a quick thing though, because Mike and Trina pointed out
yes.
that Hadley, I need to, that was right. Mike and Trina pointed out that Biden coming in with Reese, that a strong dose of the left just moment would really drive things. So that a second Trump administration is far stronger, far better than a second would have been under other compounding conditions.
Hey, one point.
Well, that's okay. If you had a question, I just defer to that question. But quickly, both of you all have mentioned the issue of inflation, and yet nobody's discussed, as I look at it, the 400-pound gorilla in the room, which is when are we going to get a Fed chairman who understands the nature of inflation and the role he plays in generating that inflation? I mean, we have a Fed chairman who's not an economist. It's not surprising to me that he's not doing a particularly good job. But it seems we've had a series of Fed chairmen appointed by both parties who are clueless as to the role they play in creating inflation. And
all I can say is inflation is the worst thing you can do to a country. Sure. The worst years of my life were the 1977, 78, 79 as a self-employed writer. With wheelbarrow inflation, Germany gets Hitler. With unemployment, America gets Roosevelt. Well, the price of gold is security for a country, and I don't understand why Biden took took McGill, our still costs.
Trump has his choice. Yeah, Trump will get the hit in just a few months. And he's made 3 people.
Yeah.
There'll be and so I think you can narrow it down to that. And then really, how independent will they feel once they get up there? So we have another quick question. I think this is what I have to what. Japanese, I'll be back tonight. Yeah, Tommy has a parent scout. But I'm going to tell one story that again, I sit with them all in the orange, this April 92. And the car was just biting, she chewing down peanuts. And they told us, so, Han, I guess you figure putting the house. This is April 92. So, yeah. I said, we tell me how you built this process. He thought California was laws or something like that, Tom. It wasn't, you read it very quick. Well, I just come off a election for county executive in 91. I won it, but you can just see the elect places in turmoil. And as we set down the economy, I think most of us figured out it was 12 years into some that run you were going to get out. It's what happened. That one question will get the master.
Last question.
Sure. I'll ask the black swan event question in light of recent sort of call support Trump's status of being one of her dead. What happens if Vance ends up getting elevated soon? What do you think that will happen in terms of realignment and, coalitions, voter distributing?
I think Trumpism stays. I think that the coalitions that Trump has brought to bear in the direction stays. I mean, it'll depend on the flexibility of his successor. But I think that's one of the reasons he took him, is he felt comfortable with him on some of these issues that divide the party. You want to go, you have to get about. I'll be back tonight. And we'll be back to the same as always after. Be quiet. Don't go.
Want to get him at last. That was on 100 days. I want to be sure to be that. Well, I thought that was one of the most interesting moments in 2024 was Trump's selection of Vance, which took I took a seminar to the Republican National Convention, which we do. We're the only university that does that. We fund watching your seminars, and we cover both conventions on the grounds. That was a fascinating pick because it was this was a Roman adoption. He was identifying his successor, which means that Trump already had a concept of a presidency beyond himself. And so that tells me that the intention in 2024 was to elect a 12-year government, not a 4-year government, but a 12-year government, which is about as long as a government can function. 12 years is about the max. Franklin Roosevelt wanted to go that you go off. And so they were going for maximum reach, and Vance was chosen on that basis. The question is whether he is in fact electable, and my view of it is that he is, but I hear people that say he isn't. So
I think he is. Where do we have to stop? Someone did one more story before we
Tell me.
I want David, listen to David's story. One of my favorite David suits. You were 10 years old and you thought you wanted to way up a knob, right? Right? It was 1958, down the bottom, the decision was being made about landing troops in Lebanon. But you thought you were right now, right? Right. Tell us the story.
Well, this is why I became I've written 2 books. And actually, the 2 books that I wanted to bring. I wanted to write a book about the man I knew, Dwight Eisenhower and Gettysburg. I wanted to write a book about World War II to join my father and grandfathers knowing something about this conflict, but I always wanted to be a writer. So at age 10, I write a short story. In fact, I wrote it in the White House. This was, we were just visiting there we were nearby, we were in Northern Virginia, but we spent weekends there when my parents were on the road and things like that. And so the date was July 15, 1958. Marines were landing in Lebanon the morning that I arrived in the West Wing with the handwritten manuscript of a short story that I'd written about my cousin Janet, who had come east from Chicago in the summer of 1957. She made a big impression on me, so I wrote a little short story called Janet's Stay. I walked up to the president's secretary. I said, "Please type this up." Typed it up.
What's her name?
and Whitman.
And Weber. This
So when we go over to a Xerox machine, we have 10 copies of this thing, a Xerox machine for new, so this is very exciting. July 15th, 58 was a great time to be in the West Wing White House with a copy of their first short story for sale. Because Marines were landing in Lebanon. So you have the cabinet meeting you were recessing and the National Security Council meeting you were recessing. And so I put this thing on sale for 15 cents a copy. I'm selling Granite State to people as they came out of meetings.
I mean, the cabinet is coming out of the meeting. I
Saw it. And I find myself in the presence of the Vice President of the United States. That's how I went on to become writer, because I got encouragement. He was a hero standing there. Vice President Nixon said, well, what is this? And I said, this is my first story. And he says, how much does it cost? And I said, 15 cents. We didn't carry change, but I came up with 15 cents. And 3 days later, I get a letter from the Vice President of the United States saying, dear David, I want you to know that last night, Mrs. Nixon and the girls and I gathered in the living room to read Janet State. We want you to know that you're one of our very favorite authors.
So, and also you discover this is not signing outside the cabinet meeting, novels for sale, and they're saying like hotcakes.
Yes, so we look back to
So you discover you can make money as a writer at that.
It was America's armed. It was an historic day too, because that was the first moment where American forces set boots on the ground east of Egypt, east and north of Egypt, in the Middle East. That's how you know. In response, by the way, to conditions in Lebanon, but also a coup in Iraq, which had prompted a pledge by the Iraqi regime that had overthrown Hussein to liberate Kuwait as the 19th province of Iraq. There were massive forces on the Kuwaiti border, and so we intervened to Lebanon to deter.
This is the Eisenhower Doctrine for
There was Eisenhower Iraq, and them as so that was an historic moment as well. Launched me as a writer, but I would have been a novelist, I think, if I hadn't met Hadley Arkes, who not only he taught me two things in politics, which is why he's such an extraordinary man, and I'm glad that this event is on account. One is take students seriously. That is something that I've always done at the University of Pennsylvania. And if you give students a chance, that's hard to do. And the second is the moral component, the ethical component in politics. The importance of that, and the importance of natural law, moral reasoning. I have a quote, my favorite quote that I read to every class I teach, Leo Strauss. Your teacher.
Wow.
Quoting him, all political action aims at either preservation or change. When desiring to preserve, we wish to prevent a change for the worse, and when desiring a change, we wish to bring about something better. All political action, therefore, is grounded in some thought of better or worse, some thought about the good. And that is where you have dedicated your entire career, and this was the impact it conveyed on the profession, on your students, and on the country.
That's very sweet, David. You're terrific. Thank you so much.
I got you about your little